Alright, so if a Titanfall happens in the woods and no one's around, does it still make a sound? Yes. Actually, yes it does. Let's find out if anyone played Titanfall 2. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am BD, and this is Did Anyone Play?, a series where we investigate, analyze, and determine the truth about how much gamers have actually played a game like Titanfall 2. How do we do this? We use trophy and achievement milestones within games, and then compare those results to an ever-growing database to evaluate and rank games compared to the rest of the industry. Using objective data and statistical comparisons, we can draw conclusions. We aren't reviewing the game in a traditional sense. Our goal is to provide analysis that can be better used to understand player preference while ignoring game sales and hype to ensure we see reality as it truly is. Please drop a like or a sub to the channel if you want more of these types of videos. We're just starting out, so anything you can do is very much appreciated. I want to thank everyone for their huge support. We've had great reactions in our last couple of videos, and the support's been wonderful. We appreciate it. A quick spoiler warning as we may be talking about some elements of late game progression. So let's find out if anyone actually played Titanfall 2 on Xbox, PS4, and Steam. Remember that all percentages we will be talking about here come from the total number of players that actually launched and or played the game, not bought the game, so the results are a full reflection on how players played Titanfall 2. The first milestone that players will reach is called the Graduate. This milestone is achieved when a player completes the initial training for the game. When the player finishes the gauntlet in under 2 minutes, they are allowed to leave the tutorial and are awarded this milestone. So how many players have made it to this very first early milestone in Titanfall 2? On Xbox, 56.8% of players got to this first milestone. For PS4, 76.9%, and for Steam, it was 78.1%. So let's pause here to evaluate. Steam and PlayStation are off to a great start, but for Xbox, we see that 45% of players never make it through the very basic tutorial. This is a bit devastating when you think about it. Losing that many players even before the real game begins is a huge setback. Here's a quick look in graph form, and I've put the database averages up there. Steam and PS4 are above average for the milestone 1, so that's good, but Xbox is clearly not. It's a bad look for the platform. So what is Titanfall 2? It's a first-person shooter where the player controls mechs called Titans and their pilots. Titanfall 2 is the sequel to Titanfall, and unlike its predecessor, it has a single-player campaign. We will be focusing on how many players progress through that campaign in this analysis. The story for Titanfall 2 follows Jack Cooper, a rifleman who bonds with a Titan and tries to prevent the usage of a superweapon. It was developed by Respawn Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts. Titanfall 2 released on all platforms in October of 2016. The second milestone all players would likely reach is called Hot Mess. This is awarded after a player defeats Cain, which is the first boss Titan a player will face in the game. So for Steam, 65.2% of players made it this far, PS4 is at 60.4%, and Xbox is at 44.9%. Here we see that there is a continued decline of players. However, Xbox slows the decline to be more in line with the rest of the platforms, and that's a good sign. Now, it's always good to understand the competition a game was up against when it was launched. What was happening around October 28, 2016 in the gaming world? Well, titles like Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, Battlefield 1, and Gears of War 4 came out around this time on the platforms. Looking at Google Trends, here we see that Titanfall 2 in blue is getting swamped by the competition. It's also important to note that Electronic Arts owns Battlefield 1 as well. So why they put out two competitive first-person shooters at nearly the same time is not clear, but we see that competition was very strong, and hype for Titanfall 2 was respectively low. We like to pick a mid-game milestone for our third marker. For Titanfall 2, we chose Secret Plans. This is awarded when a player completes Mission 5 of the main story, and it cannot be missed. How many players are left at this point in the game? For Xbox, it is 36.6%. On PS4, we have 48.7%, and finally for Steam, 53.6% are left. Steam still has over half the player population still engaged at this point, and PS4 is not far behind. Titanfall 2 is looking fairly strong here. How did Titanfall 2 do with critics? Well, Metacritic for PS4 has it at an 89 out of 100. For Xbox, it was 87 out of 100. And for Steam, the reviews show overwhelmingly positive recent and all-time, with over 180,000 reviews. These are great reviews, and you can see that even major review outlets scored Titanfall 2 very strongly. Reception was very good for the game overall. The most important milestone is our fourth one. This is for completing the main story and what we'll be ultimately basing our final score on. It definitely shows how many players finished the game and truly played Titanfall 2. This milestone is Certified Pilot, and it's awarded for completing the main campaign on regular difficulty. Where does Titanfall 2 end up on the different platforms? On Xbox, 25.3% of players completed the game. For Steam, it was 41.4%, and on PS4, 33.1% did just that. Let's pause here since we've reached the end of the game. We want to check the percentage of players that quit each platform after making it through the first milestone but failing to reach game completion. Here, all platforms are doing better than average. Steam is knocking it out of the park, but what might surprise you is that Xbox held on to players better than PlayStation after the large loss at the first milestone. It's a great indicator that once the game got its hooks into gamers, they stayed around to play. Finally, to get a feel for how the completionists treated this game, the rare milestone 5 chosen for Titanfall 2 is called Annihilation. This milestone can be achieved if the player kills 25 enemy infantry units in under 2 seconds anytime during the campaign. For Xbox, we see that 1.1% of players reached this, for PS4 it was 1.9%, and for Steam, 1.5% of players did it. Now let's see the full picture. Here are the raw milestones for our platforms for Titanfall 2, and we've also added the database averages for each milestone in gray for comparison purposes. Let's get into it. For Titanfall 2, we have a bit of an anomaly at the start, and Milestone 1, Steam and PS4 are above average, and players are making it through that tutorial, although not at the levels you might expect for such an early part of the game. But unfortunately, like other games we've seen, Xbox has quite a big initial drop, moving it well below the average. Moving on to Milestone 2, we see that Xbox stabilizes their player loss and the curve more matches the other platforms. In fact, that trend continues to Milestone 4, where all the platforms actually finish up above the database average, so that's a good story there. Finally, for Milestone 5, we see PS4 coming out on top. So that's our final tally for Titanfall 2 milestones. But now let's see how the game stacks up against all other games in our database and find out if anyone truly played Titanfall 2. We use Milestone 4 as our ultimate ranking target. Here are the results for each platform for Milestone 4 once again. It's time to reveal the final score Titanfall 2 has in our database. Here we go. Steam is at 9 out of 10, PS4 is an 8 out of 10, and Xbox is a 6 out of 10. Titanfall 2 is performing outstanding on Steam, very strong on PS4, and above average on Xbox. Looks like there's a lot to celebrate here. So those are the scores, but let's see if we can tease out some other observations by looking at these results in different ways. It's time for the deep dive. Let's start with progressive player loss. Each milestone shows how many total players have stopped playing the game at that particular point. Xbox leads in players lost at every milestone, while Steam clearly does the best through the main story milestones. Moving on, we can look at milestone player retention. This calculation only takes into account the player population loss as a percentage compared to the previous milestone. Here we see that at the first milestone, Xbox has a dramatic loss, and we know this. But then through milestone 2 to 4, it's actually PlayStation that loses the most by percentage until they improve at milestone 5. Speaking of that, how about completionists? How did the rarest milestones shake out on different platforms? Here we see that PlayStation takes top honors with Steam a strong second, and Xbox showing not too shabby as well. This is a pretty balanced result. Finally, we check on early versus late game retention. When you read a chart like this, the best performers are further away from the center of the circle. Early game, Steam is the strongest, with PlayStation coming close but Xbox trailing significantly. For the end game, Steam is still doing well, and you see Xbox barely overtaking PS4. Finally, for completionists, we see PS4 slightly pulling ahead of the others. Now let's take one final look at all the platforms and their Milestone 4 results, but this time we show you the full percent rank within our database. This is to give you a detailed view of how the rankings played out. Use this data as you will. Let's wrap this up. So what are our major takeaways from all the data? For Titanfall 2, the most glaring issue we saw was the tutorial mission and how it was received by players. Completing the gauntlet clearly caused more than a few players to quit extremely early, and you never want to see this kind of player loss during a simple tutorial. So the big takeaway should be that however the design of the tutorial was envisioned, it did not connect with players and actually drove many away, and that lesson needs to be clearly learned. Xbox specifically is an interesting case. It has a huge initial loss before the first milestone, but then battled back and kept players after that. Titanfall 2 has a rank of 6 on Xbox, but I have no doubt that if the tutorial section had not impacted player retention so heavily on Xbox, that the ranking would have ended up much better as the data curves would suggest. Finally, I think we can clearly say that the campaign for Titanfall 2 was a big success with gamers. That's even considering the massive uphill battle this title had to fight going against two titans of the FPS genre in Call of Duty and Battlefield. Ranking 9 on Steam and 8 on PlayStation shows that gamers really played this game, and it might be interesting to see how those other larger titles stack up against how Titanfall 2 performed in a future video. Titanfall 2 is an interesting game to talk about. The original game had no single-player element, only multiplayer, and it was not on PlayStation. The sequel brings back the frenetic multiplayer gameplay but adds a compelling single-player campaign and also adds PlayStation as a platform. We see that players took to that new campaign very well and enjoyed it throughout. There's a lot of love for the Titanfall brand in the gaming community, and Respawn has done a lot to foster that. We can only hope that there's more Titanfall goodness in our future, as the results of our analysis clearly show that players are ready for more. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the YouTube support stuff. I'd love to read any comments you have down below. What conclusions do you all take from this data? And of course, feel free to suggest the next game we should look at to determine if anyone played it. Until then, take care of yourself and each other.